Hello friends, welcome to CivilsWrite YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal, and in this video I'll be discussing with you 2024 UPSC Civil Services Mains General Studies Paper 3. All the questions will be discussed in part 1 and part 2. So in this particular video, we'll be discussing with you 10 topics. So let me first highlight those 10 topics for you. We will be discussing the pattern and trend of public expenditure on social services in the post-reforms period. We will be discussing the causes of persistent high food inflation in India and what are the steps that we can take to control this type of inflation. We will be speaking about the successful implementation of land reforms in some part of the country and why is it that only in some parts we were successful and not in other parts. We will examine the role of millets in ensuring health and nutritional security in our country. We will also be looking at the present scenario of intellectual property right with respect to life materials, right? And we'll also be understanding what is happening in India. We'll also be looking at electronic toll collection on highways. So what is the technology behind that? What are its advantages and limitations, and what are the suggested changes? We will look at industrial pollution of river water, which is a significant environmental issue. We'll be discussing how we can mitigate this, what are the steps we can take in this regard. We will be looking at the role of environmental NGOs and activists in influencing environmental impact assessment outcomes and so on and so forth. And we'll also be discussing finally the narco-terrorism aspect and how does it pose a serious security threat to our country and what are the steps that we can take to counter narco-terrorism in our country, right? So these are the 10 questions that I would like to discuss with you in this particular video. As always, these videos will be helpful for you in the upcoming mains examinations, upcoming prelims examinations. A lot of topics that we'll be discussing in this particular discussion will be relevant for prelims exams in the coming years for sure. It will also be relevant for PCS examinations because topics do tend to get repeated. Questions do tend to get repeated in a diluted format. For beginners, those who are just starting to prepare for the civil services examination, this video will teach you how you should approach answer writing, what is the level of depth, breadth of knowledge that is expected out of you. And ultimately, if you're an answer writer, I'm giving you an opportunity to do assisted answer writing. You can either write answers to this question, get it evaluated, and then watch the video. You can watch the video, then write answers and get it evaluated. The choice is yours, completely leaving it up to you. This is a very cost effective initiative. I would request you to first download CivilsWrite app, right? And then explore the variety of enrollment options that are there with us. As it is, the entire content is being taught free by us. We don't believe in charging anything for teaching you, right? So the teaching aspect is free, but if you want to evaluate yourself, if you want to write, if you want to do some kind of practice, then that is something there. There's a cost involved over there for you. It's a very minor cost as compared to the amount of time that you are putting in. So do think about practicing as well, right? So let us start with our discussion. Okay, I'll be spending approximately 10 minutes on each question. I intend this video to be approximately a 1.5 hours ka video, right? So let us start with our discussion. So we have to discuss the pattern and trend of public expenditure, meaning government expenditure on social services such as education, healthcare, so on, in the post-reforms period. So post-reforms period is post-1991 wala period. This is the period in which we have introduced liberalization, privatization, and globalization reforms. Right. Now, is this expenditure in consonance with achieving the objective of inclusive growth? That is the question that is being asked. That first of all, you need to be aware of the macro trend of this expenditure, and second of all, you need to comment whether this is good enough or not. Right. So let us start with our discussion, approach, and content that will be required for this answer. Okay. So in the post-reforms period, the important pillars of our economic reforms are liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Right. Now the idea over here is that there have been significant changes in the role of the government in the post-reforms period. Right. So in the post-reforms period, government is an enabler, a facilitator more than anything else. And government should ideally be focusing on provision of public services, social services, be it health, education, housing, or social welfare. Right. Because if we can provide a common baseline of these services to our entire population, then we will be able to bring everybody on the same starting line. And that will be the precursor for inclusive growth, because inclusive growth typically means that everybody is getting the benefits of growth, everybody is able to participate in the growth. So I can participate either as a worker or as an entrepreneur or somebody who is providing capital or somebody who is providing land, and I can get some kind of income by providing some factors of production. That's what inclusive growth means, that everybody is able to participate in the growth process as providers of factors of production and as earners of factors of income, right? So that's what the idea of inclusive growth is. And whom do we need to try and include? We need to try and include the marginalized groups into the growth process, into the production process, right? So what is the pattern and trend, right? So there's a shift in priorities post reforms. That is what you have to highlight, right? So generally speaking, in the post reforms period, there was a tightening of expenditure, in the sense that government of India wanted to bring its expenditure down. Why? Because they wanted to bring their borrowing down. Why? Because they wanted to control the fiscal deficit and the debt level of the economy. So in general, expenditure was curtailed. Okay. And obviously that had an impact also on public expenditure on social services. So the fiscal constraints that we were facing in the 1990s were quite severe, right? And there was a requirement for, bringing about economic stabilization and, leaving savings on the table for the private sector to borrow and invest. So government basically brought down its expenditure in the initial part of 1990s. But from the 2000 onwards, there has been a general increase in the allocation towards social sectors, right? At least at an absolute level, right? As well as a percentage of government's budget. In general, there has been an increase in allocation towards these important sectors, because government realizes that there are socio-economic inequalities that we need to reduce, and that's very, very important, right? So if you try to put some numbers over here, you can do this kind of an analysis. You can pick up the budgets over the years and do this analysis, or you can just run with this basic number over here, that government expenditure on social services as a percentage of GDP. So that has increased from around 5% to around 7.5%. So be it your Manrega, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, National Rural Health Mission, or Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, these are the important schemes, social services schemes, where the government is spending a decent amount of money, right? There has been a changing composition as well. So there is greater emphasis on rural development, employment generation, health and education, because ultimately we want to bring about, human development, poverty alleviation, and human capital formation in our country, right? So there is improving focus on these areas. All right. Now, if I try to, juxtapose this public expenditure trends with, let us say, the objective of inclusive growth. Okay. So how does the picture look like? So for instance, if we talk about inclusive growth, poverty reduction, employment generation is important. And there is continuous public expenditure on, let's say, Manrega and the Food Security Act, which will both help in poverty reduction and employment generation, right? So definitely, if you're having food security and if you're having some kind of income security, that will be helpful. So whether it is rural poverty or food security or employment opportunity, these schemes are very important. Now, the fact that we have been continuously spending money on these programs shows that they are aligned well with our objective of inclusive growth. Same goes for empowerment, because when we speak about inclusive growth, one of the components or one of the pillars of inclusive growth is empowerment, right? To bring about your empowerment, we are having Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, midday meal scheme, right to education, and so on and so forth. And if you see, India's literacy rates overall have improved. So if you can highlight these trends, right, these are macro trends, these are indisputable trends, that will be helpful. Again, health expenditure and inclusive growth are linked. So we have been prioritizing, whether it is the National Urban Health Mission, Rural Health Mission, or Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, right? These programs have consistently been supported by the government, and the result is that there has been an improvement in life expectancy, infant mortality, as well as maternal mortality rates. So if you are able to highlight these rates, these numbers, that would be really fantastic. But if you are not able to highlight these numbers as it is, even if you are mentioning it, it will make sense, right? So broadly speaking, if you look at India's infant mortality rate, so that was 80 per thousand, that's come down to 30 per thousand live births in 2019, very broadly speaking. Same goes for your social security schemes, whether it is your Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana or whether it is your Ujjwala Yojana or any of these schemes, right? So for instance, Jan Dhan Yojana, it brought 400 unbanked individuals into the fold of financial inclusion, right? So you see that there is a undeniable fact over here that your public expenditure trend is broadly in consonance with your inclusive growth objective. Is it sufficient? Have we achieved the inclusive growth objective? The answer is no. We are on the way. We are getting there, right? Which is where you need to highlight the challenges, that yes, there is regional disparity in social spending. that there are still regions in India which are lagging behind, and it is not as if that the government is blind to that idea, right? So poorer states such as Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, so on a per capita basis, they need more help, right? That will be very helpful. We need to enhance the fiscal capacity of our states by either giving them money or helping them generate more internal resources. There has to be a greater emphasis on appropriate implementation, right? While Manrega is an important scheme, there have been implementational problems in Manrega which are well documented. I cannot discuss that over here right now, but you are aware that there are delays in the payment of Manrega wages. There is not insufficient work available in Manrega. There is corruption and leakage happening via Manrega in broad daylight. There are issues that are there, right? When it comes to health and education infrastructure, right? Obviously, we do not have enough infrastructure because as a percentage of GDP, we are still spending way less than what we should be spending if we compare ourselves with the global average. So our financial outlay has increased on an absolute basis, even on a percentage basis, it may have increased, but we are still nowhere close to the global averages. So when you answer like this, where you accept that yes, there is the intent is there in the right direction, that yes, progress has been made, and then you try to highlight some of the challenges, then it creates a positive impression upon the examiner that yes, you understand what is happening. You understand as, let us say, a future public servant where we are headed, right? So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is simple, that in the post-reforms period, the public expenditure on social services has shown a positive trend. There is an increasing allocation towards health, education, poverty alleviation, as well as social welfare programs, right? And we are mindful of the objective of inclusive growth, of reducing poverty, enhancing literacy, improving healthcare access, right? Of course, there are challenges such as regional disparities, inefficient implementation, as well as inadequate infrastructure, and the fact that spending is not up to the mark, right? And if we do want to achieve our inclusive growth, which we want to achieve, right? So we need to bring about a more equitable and efficient public expenditure pattern. We need to focus more on underdeveloped region and to strengthen institutional mechanism to ensure effective delivery of services. So this becomes your appropriate conclusion to this particular question. This is the spirit in which you have to try and answer the question. Here you can try to bring in the tadka of current affairs as much as you can. You can do further value addition, but the 85 to 90% of the framework and the content that is required to answer this question is something that I have supplied to you. I would encourage you to do some more value addition on your part and write the answer and submit for evaluation, right? Moving ahead to the next question. Now we need to talk about food inflation in India. Again, this is a very straightforward topic. What are the causes of persistent food inflation in India? Why am I saying that this is a straightforward topic? But if you prepare with us for the mains examination coming ahead, so we'll be discussing this topic with you because this was being discussed very heavily in current affairs. No reasonably good student of civil services would be bounced by this question, would be surprised by this question, right? So what are the causes of persistent food inflation in India? How good is monetary policy as a tool to control this type of inflation? Very straightforward, very regulation kind of a question. Let me explain what is happening over here. Now, typically what happens in India is that there is supply chain bottleneck, right? When it comes to food products, that even though the production may be there, but evacuating the production from rural areas and bringing it to the urban markets in a timely manner, many a times we fail to do that for a variety of different vegetables and pulses and so on, right? So this food inflation, it's a recurring issue, right? Whether you look at the supply side issue or the demand side issue, right? Now, this high food inflation is deeply problematic, especially for the poorer section of our population, because they tend to spend a higher percentage of their income on purchasing food items, right? And of course, it creates a problem for country's economic stability, because when inflation is high, then RBI is forced to introduce a contractionary monetary policy. They are forced to keep the interest rates high. And when the interest rates high, everybody is hurting. The business is hurt. You and me as borrowers of home loans and education loans and whatnot will also hurt in urban India, right? So the idea over here is that, see, food inflation is not something which can be easily controlled by interest rate. Why? Because see, I don't borrow money on interest to buy food, right? I buy food out of my own income. So I don't go to banks to borrow money to buy food. So even if the interest rate is kept high, that does not make any impact on my demand for food, which is where the question arises that why does RBI increase the interest rate if interest rate has no bearing upon my decision to buy food, right? So that's where the question is that does it help? Does having a high interest rate help Does monetary policy help in controlling food inflation, given the fact that increase in food prices is a structural problem, in the sense that today, if let us say there is a reduced harvest of tomato prices are going to be high for the next 3 4 months. You cannot do anything about it, no matter if you make the interest rate 20% in India. That's not going to change anything, right? So it's a structural problem. So let's discuss about this problem. So what are the causes of persistent high food inflation in India? So there are supply side constraints, there are productivity related issues. Like for example, productivity of a lot of crops in India is still below the global average because our land holdings are fragmented, because our farming techniques are outdated, because our irrigation facilities are pathetic, right? So because of this, there are recurring food shortages of one type or the other, and there is a recurrent increase in prices in one geography or the other, right? So dependence on monsoon, that creates a lot of volatility. That creates a lot of volatility, right? You can also cite climate change and extreme weather events, that when there is unpredictable weather patterns, flood, drought, etc., etc. So naturally, it's going to have a negative impact on yield. Like for instance, in 2019, unseasonal rainfall in Maharashtra that significantly damaged the onion crops, leading to a significant increase in the prices of onion. So this is something which is very easy an example for you to give, right? You can understand that, examiner will also appreciate that. Logistical and supply chain issues are there. We do not have enough cold storages. We do not have sufficient transportation networks, right? And that kind of exacerbates the problem. It makes the problem worse, right? Like for example, we lose a lot of fruits and vegetables ka production in India simply because we do not have a good number of efficient cold chain infrastructure in our country still. We are still in the process of putting it there, right? So these are all your supply side issues. Very broadly speaking, they touch upon almost all the problems that we may face, right? There are of course demand side factors as well, that there is rising income levels, especially in cities. People have a higher disposable income, right? And people tend to create significant demand for value added items, protein rich items, milks, fruits, vegetables, and whatnot, right? So this shifting consumption pattern, right, it requires, it requires sufficient supply support, which is not always there. So population growth, urbanization, it creates its own strain on the food supply system. So there is a significant need for backward integration between retailers and wholesalers in urban areas with, let us say, farmers who are growing these items. Often that backward integration is not there because oftentimes the APMC laws, etc., in our country do not allow that backward integration to take place easily. There are structural issues in agriculture. So supply side, demand side is fine. There are structural issues, that this MSP program is a joke more than anything else. It's a joke. Why? Because first of all, these 25, 26 crops ke liye jiske we declare MSP, we don't really purchase those crops. We purchase only wheat, rice, sugarcane, cotton kind of crops on MSP. Right, and that has sufficiently distorted the cropping pattern in favor of these crops which actually get purchased at MSP, right? So we underproduce crops which are not purchased at MSP and overproduce crops which are purchased at MSP. So government needs to stop, this nonsense over here. They really need to either purchase sufficient amount of all these different items at MSP and make sure that you have decent buffer stock to take care of prices. Otherwise this problem is not going to go away, right? And our distribution network, again, it's doing its job, but it's not doing a sufficient job, right? Because we are distributing only basic food items through the public distribution system. We are not distributing, definitely not distributing pulses, milk, fruits and vegetables. Can we or can we not? That's a separate debate, right? But that distribution system is a age-old distribution system, 50-year-old distribution. It needs to be revamped, keeping in mind the 21st century requirements of our country. Now, coming to the immediate second topic of whether RBI's monetary policy is effective in controlling food inflation. So honestly, there is a limited scope for monetary policy because this is a supply side problem, right? Now, if there is a crop failure or poor logistics, like I said to you, that no matter how high you keep the interest rate, it's not going to address the root cause, right? I mean, RBI can keep increasing the interest rate, but does that mean that I will reduce my demand for milk? No, right? And this tightening of monetary policy doesn't really have a positive impact on the situation of food inflation, but it definitely reduces demand for other sectors, right? So it increases my borrowing cost, it reduces investments that can happen, right? So that's the general criticism, but you have to balance this criticism. You have to balance this criticism, that, and you have to here mention that RBI is committed to this inflation targeting framework. that if RBI is not seen taking the necessary steps, then the inflation expectations of our households will get unhinged. Right? People will start expecting higher and higher inflation, and then that expectation will become a reality, and then that reality will bite us very badly in the back. Right? So we have to keep the inflation expectations anchored. To keep the inflation expectations anchored, RBI has to keep the interest rates up when the food inflation is high. So given the fact that RBI is publicly committed to this idea of controlling inflation within 4% plus minus 2%, we have to keep the inflation up. We don't have a choice. RBI doesn't have a choice. Because if RBI is not seen attacking the problem of inflation, RBI will lose credibility. Monetary policy will lose credibility. Inflation expectations will get unhinged. And when people expect higher and higher prices, then they will demand higher wages. Higher wages will mean higher production cost. Higher production cost will mean higher prices. Higher prices will mean that again people will demand higher wages because they will see that the living cost is increasing. So until the time is that RBI is seen attacking the problem, people will believe that this problem can be controlled. The day RBI stops attacking this problem, saying that this is not our problem to solve, that will not be very good outcome. In the meanwhile, RBI is doing this. Government of India needs to take alternative measures. Government of states need to take alternative measures to control food inflation. For example, supply chain improvement. For example, diversification of cropping pattern. For example, government policies such as PDSs and MSPs and public-private partnership to enhance infrastructure. These are the kind of steps that you need to take. That moment you start diversifying your production, moment you start stabilizing the food price by having sufficient buffer stocks, moment you start doing all of these things in a synchronized, in a coordinated manner, you will be able to eventually reduce this problem, right? Because we know which are the regular culprit crops jahan par ye problem aa raha hai, right? So it's not a rocket science, honestly speaking, and even if it was rocket science, we can still solve it, right? So what is the conclusion? What is the broad approach? See, persistent high food inflation in India, it's a supply side problem, right? And going ahead with climate shocks and looking at the inefficiencies of our sector and looking at the structural issues in a skewed cropping pattern, this problem is not going to go away, right? This problem is not going to go away. We will have to attack this problem in a multidimensional manner. Yes, monetary policy is there. It can control general levels of inflation, but being able to impact food inflation in a very narrow sense, that's not happening. It's not effective. If you want to effectively control food inflation, yes, RBI needs to attack the problem from its side, but you need to improve productivity, you need to improve storage infrastructure, you need to improve supply chain infrastructure, you need to improve distribution infrastructure, right? So we require targeted fiscal measures, support from the government for these steps. We need robust agricultural reforms, and thereafter we will be able to achieve food stability, food price stability in our country. This is the broad approach that you need to take for this question. Moving ahead to the next question. What were the factors which are responsible for successful implementation of land reforms in some parts of the country? Very textbook question. Any student who has prepared well for the mains examination, right, will be able to answer something about this particular question. It's not difficult. If you are a beginner, you may be, surprised by this question, which is absolutely fine. It's understandable, but you will be able to eventually answer this question. I can assure you that, right? So land reforms in India, they have been addressing historical inequalities in land ownership. That was the objective. That land ownership was concentrated in the hands of few. We didn't want that. A lot of tillers, a lot of farmers, a lot of cultivators were not the actual owners of land. We wanted to redress that problem. Because if you are not the owner of the land, you will not be benefiting from the profit. You will just be a worker, you will just be a majdoor, right? We don't want everybody to be a majdoor in India, which is why we introduced land reforms at the time of independence. So that there is equitable access to land, so that if you are rural, poor, landless laborer, you get some land, right? Now this idea of land reforms was well debated, well accepted, well articulated. Everybody understood its importance, except for the fact that except for West Bengal, Kerala, and some parts of Jammu and Kashmir, this idea of land reforms has not been very successfully implemented in India, right? Why? Because of the unholy nexus between politicians and landowners and zamindars and upper caste folks in rural India at the time of independence, right? This entire idea of land reforms was sabotaged by patchy implementation, right? So where it was successful not because it was rocket science, it was successful because there was a political will, right? That there was a grassroots mobilization, there was significant pressure from the bottom of the pyramid. Governance systems were aligned with that pressure. Institutional support was there in those regions, in those geographies, and there was enough critical mass available to ensure the success of these programs. So where grassroots mobilization was weak, where the political will was weak, where the governance was apathetic, where the institutional support was lacking, land reforms failed and failed badly, right? In some geographies of India, it didn't fail, right? So speaking about the political will and strong leadership, right? So for instance, West Bengal and Kerala, there was committed leadership at the state level, right? Leftist political parties who are champions of redistribution, who are champions of reducing inequality, who are champions of the cause of the masses. So they really put their lot behind these kinds of programs, right? So as late as 1970s, you see Jyoti Basu launching Operation Barga, right? With the idea that let us document and secure tenancy rights for sharecroppers, right? Let us give them some kind of land tenure security. What do I mean by land tenure security? That if you are the owner of the land and I am your tenant, you cannot just throw me out of the land and say that get out. No, that's not done, right? I have some, as a tenant also I have some rights. I have invested in this land, I have worked on this land, right? So you have to mention, not too strongly, but you have to mention the ideological commitment established by socialist governments, by Marxist leaders, right? That played a pivotal role in the successful implementation where it was successfully implemented, right? So it was seen as a tool of social justice, it was seen as a tool of poverty alleviation, and it was implemented well. That is one part of the success. Another part of the success is because of the grassroots mobilization and people's participation. See, if there is sufficient pressure from the bottom, everything will get implemented. That's reality in India. You need to create pressure, right? So where there was strong peasant organization and unions, right? So they pressurized the government to implement the reforms. They were the ones who fought for the empowerment of the rural folks, right? Like for example, tenant farmers and landless laborers, they were mobilized in Kerala. There was, a mass movement kind of a scenario that was operating in Kerala, and that was helpful. So taking collective action, doing this advocacy, bringing people together is the way of getting changes done in your favor even today, right? So if you can get this participation done, right, then that can be helpful. And finally, the third leg of this entire successful implementation is having effective legislations, right? So laws were created by many states, but states created laws with a lot of loopholes, right? So putting into place strong and clear laws is very important, right? Clearly defining what is the ceiling on land holdings. What do I mean by ceilings on land holding? That if you have land more than this ceiling, then we will confiscate that land and redistribute amongst those who don't have any land, right? So clearly defining the ceilings, ensuring the rights of tenants, right? That is very important, right? So in this regard, Kerala's Land Reform Act of 1963 was a landmark legislation which was able to, get all of these things done in a significantly appropriate manner, right? So institutional support, whether it is from the bureaucracy or whether it is from the judiciary, whether it is from the lawmakers, whether it is from the land tribunals, whether it is from the survey offices, whether it is from the land reform committees, that institutional mechanism has to be extremely strong, right? There has to be focus on beneficiary identification and targeting. That किसके लिए हम ये कर रहे हैं? Who are those landless laborers and tenants? They need to be documented. Their survey needs to be done and they need to be identified. And then their rights need to be secured. So I'm sure that it's not easily done, but those who did it implemented it well, right? So that's then overcoming the resistance from landowners, right? Because landowners will put up a stiff resistance. They will take legal action against you, right? So it was done, and in Kerala, for example, the landlords over there also resisted land distribution, but there were strong legal provisions. There was a political will, and that was how it was achieved, right? So, so regions where landowners they had less political and social influence, these reforms were implemented well. Regions where landowners were deeply entrenched, right, in the political system, it was not implemented, right? And the economic and social impact of land reform was also quite significant, but that is not a part of the question over here, right? So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is fairly straightforward. The conclusion is that if you wanted a successful implementation, right, then you had to have a strong political leadership, B, an effective legislation, C, a grassroots mobilization, and D, an institutional support, right? And that is when it gets implemented well, right? That is when it happens, right? But states where the political will was weak, where the landowning elites had significant influence, implementation was incomplete. Now, if we, I don't know whose agenda is land reform today, but if there is agenda such as land reform on anybody's manifesto, right? So we need to have a lot of political commitment, a lot of legal reforms, and a lot of active public participation. I'm not sure whether it can be easily done, right? So this is the approach that you need to take for this particular question, where you need to highlight a broad ranging set of factors which implemented, which were behind the successful implementation of the land reforms, right? Coming to the next question, explain the role of millets for ensuring health and nutritional security in India, right? So millets, they are termed as nutri cereals. They have been a part of the staple Indian traditional diet for a very long period of time. These crops, these are highly resilient crops in the sense that they can tolerate dry weather, they can tolerate hot weather, they can really be very sturdy in these otherwise difficult conditions, right? Therefore, we tend to believe that these will be climate adaptive crops and they will be very helpful in ensuring nutritional security in our country. Now, given the fact that because of the changing lifestyles and the changing consumption pattern, there are concerns over health, malnutrition, food security, and so on. So millets, they have gained renewed attention. A lot of households, they have started rediscovering the immense nutritional potential of millet, and government is also actively promoting millets. So let's understand the nutritional benefits of millets. So they are considered to be a powerhouse of nutrients, right? Micronutrients, be it iron, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, right? They are very important for bone health, for RBC production, as well as for building immunities, right? They are high in dietary fiber, right? So that dietary fiber kind of cleanses up your digestion system. So it aids in the digestion process. It helps in managing your blood sugar levels and lowering cholesterols, right? Apart from that, gluten free and low in allergens. So they are suitable for individuals with gluten intolerance or celiac disease, right? And they do not trigger allergic reactions because we have gotten acclimatized to consuming these items for a very long period of time now. They're rich in proteins, rich in antioxidants, right? Which will again help in fighting oxidative stress and aging related diseases. So millets can therefore play an important role in combating malnutrition in India. Easy to grow, and they give you the decent bang for the buck that you're looking for always. Okay. So if you want to address micronutrient deficiency, whether it is anemia or whether any of these things are your problem, so finger millets such as ragi, pearl millets such as bajra is your go-to millets, right? So that's going to be very helpful. In India, as per National Family Health Survey, we have seen time and time again that women in this age group of 15 to 49 are routinely found anemic. So having iron rich millets would be very helpful, because fortification of crops etc. is only a limited solution to the problem. Taking supplements is only a limited solution to the problem. The solution, long term solution lies in getting the diet right, right? Foxtail millet, sorghum, they contain high quality proteins which will be helpful for child growth and development, right? So protein energy malnutrition is also a problem which can be tackled via this. If you want to improve maternal and child health, right, so that can also be done by consuming millets because of high folic acid content, calcium, as well as essential amino acids. If you want to enhance food diversity, reduce dependency on your rice and wheat, then that will also be done by having a more balanced intake for these nutrients. Millets will also bring about sustainability and agricultural resilience, simply because they are very much drought resistant. They can grow in poor soil conditions. They require minimal water. So if you are a farmer in arid and semi-arid region looking to grow something which is really relevant, millets is the go-to crops. Government needs to step up and support these kinds of farmers, right? So for literally hundreds and thousands of years now, sorghum and pearl millet, they have been grown in drought prone areas of India in Maharashtra and Rajasthan. They do not have a very heavy input requirement either, be it fertilizers or pesticides. In that sense, the environmental footprint of these crops is also relatively lighter. Their growing cycle is also shorter, right? They can support farmers' livelihoods, especially marginal farmers in drought prone areas with limited resources can start growing these crops, right? Because the chances of failure, the chances of any kind of disaster is less, and even if it does happen, these are less resource intensive crops, so they are not going to break the farmer's backbone, who has spent huge amount of money purchasing the inputs. And of course they will help in ensuring food security. Government, like I mentioned, has taken a number of initiatives for promoting millets. Like for instance, we celebrated the National Year of Millets in 2018. We celebrated the International Year of Millets in 2023. We have included it as a part of our PDS, right? So the low income groups ka nutritional intake can improve thanks to the inclusion of millets in PDS. We have this mission on nutri cereals. So there is a dedicated mission to promote millets ka cultivation. It is a part of midday meal schemes and ICDS programs. The names of these programs have recently been changed, so you can be mindful of that as well going ahead. What are the challenges in millet production? Right, see, the consumer preference still needs to be changed, right? So that is something which is still a work in progress. Supply chain issues, right from procurement, processing, storage, and distribution, still needs to be made as robust as it is for, let us say, rice and wheat, right? And ultimately, price competitiveness. So the millets, these millets, they can be priced higher than subsidized rice and wheat, which means that people will not buy these millets, will tend to buy more of those items which are more cheaply available, right? Nevertheless, you have to highlight that millets, they hold tremendous potential for ensuring health and nutritional security. So their nutritional richness, their ability to combat malnutrition, their ability to grow resiliently in the face of climate change and difficult weather conditions and difficult soil conditions makes it a critical part of our agriculture and dietary future, right? And concerted effort will be required from the government, from the civil society, from the consumers, from the brands, and so on, so that we can create a robust supply chain for the millets. So as we look forward to tackling the dual challenge of both food security and malnutrition in light of climate change, millets can provide us the sustainable and nutritious solution that we are looking for. This can be your short and simple answer. All right, moving ahead to the next question. We have to discuss in the next question what is the world scenario of intellectual property rights, right, with respect to life materials. So we need to have an understanding of this term life materials a little bit, right? That would be a little helpful. India is second in the world to file patents. Still only a few have been commercialized. So are we experts at creating meaningless patents is what the second part is asking, and explain the reasons behind this less commercialization. So as you all may be aware that I have passed out of UDCT, that is the Institute of Chemical Technology. We had one Professor Lali, right? So Professor Lali was very famous that he used to have only those many publications as the number of patents, and the patents that he created were very, very relevant when it came to their commercialization efficiency. So in that sense, Professor Lali was a game changer for the way he was operating, right? So I just wanted to recall that, prof over here. So great going. So IPRs concerning life material. So whether it is your GMOs, whether it is your plant varieties, whether it is biotechnological inventions, so they are a part of global debate, right? The moment you start expanding IPR in these areas, right? So it will have a significant impact on agriculture, on pharmaceuticals, on environmental conservation, right? So let us first understand what's happening in the IPR space, right? In the life materials space, right? So there are certain international agreements, there are certain national regulations linked with these international agreements which are informing the IPR process, right? So developed nations, they dominate patent filings and commercializations, and India is basically lagging behind, right? So your trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, that puts into place the global framework for protecting IPR, whether it is related to life forms or anything else, right? So all the WTO member countries, they need to provide IPR protection for microorganisms, plants, as well as biotech products, right? Your developed countries, they are the ones who are leading patents in biotechnology, right? So whether it is genetic engineering, medical biotechnology, or pharmaceuticals, they are the ones who are leading. Like for example, the US Patent Office, they have issued several patents for the CRISPR technology. UPSC itself has asked a number of questions on this CRISPR technology, right? So using this CRISPR technology, we are able to undertake the editing of DNAs, right? So cut, copy, paste of DNAs can be done via using this CRISPR technology, right? So whether it is plants, animals, or humans ka DNAs, all of it can be edited using the CRISPR technology, right? There are definitely concerns over biopiracy, right? So there are regular allegations of biopiracy. So indigenous knowledge and bioresources, they are being patented by foreign entities, right? Like for example, somebody tried to patent neem, somebody tried to patent haldi, as if that we don't know the benefits of neem and haldi, for crying out loud, for centuries, right? So this is the idea that you need to highlight. This is the bare idea that you need to highlight, that what is the scenario of intellectual property rights with respect to life materials. So this is the scenario, right? You need to mention TRIPS, you need to mention WTO, you need to mention biotechnology, you need to mention the fact that there is issues around biopiracy, right? If you can also highlight some more relevant laws, legislations, and treaties in this regard, that will always be further helpful, right? Apart from this, what is India's position on IPR filings and challenges in commercialization, right? So India is definitely a significant player when it comes to filing patents for pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, agriculture, etc., right? But the commercialization is low, right? So a lot of patents are getting filed from our public research institutions and universities. Like for example, the CSIR, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, it is one of the top patent holders, right? But commercialization is not up to the mark. Why? Because whatever you are patenting, whatever it is that you are creating, it needs to be relevant from a market standpoint. It needs to be relevant from an industry standpoint. And that can be ensured when there is appropriate collaboration, when the breadth and depth of collaboration is strong. But oftentimes we see that there is a significant disconnect between our research institutions and industries, right? So you are patenting, you are producing research, fine, fantastic, great job, congratulations, let's clap. But it's irrelevant many a times, right? Or we are not able to transfer this patented technology to industries for further development, right? Apart from this, India has a still weak IP ecosystem, right? So yes, patent filings are fine, right? But we need to have a stronger system when it comes to having venture capitals, when it comes to having incubation centers, when it to having technology transfer offices, which can, so when all of these blocks are in place, then you will be able to take something from the lab to the market, in a systematic manner. But that's still a work in progress in India, right? There are regulatory barriers in India, like for example, in biotechnology, in agriculture, for example, your genetically modified crops. We can do a significant amount of transfer of technology from labs to the fields, right? But this entire genetically modified crops wala jo entire field hai, this has been struck in opposition, in regulatory approvals and challenges in Supreme Courts and so on, right? So the idea over here is that we can launch genetically modified crops in India. We have the research prowess, we have the uh, uh, progress which has already been done. But because of regulatory concerns and public opposition, things are getting stuck. That's just one of the reasons. So don't make this as the chief part of your answer. There are other issues that you need to highlight, which I have already highlighted to you over here, right? High cost of commercialization. So you need to have startups, you need to have a product market fit, you need to do clinical trials, you need to get regulatory approvals. These can be expensive processes, right? And they can be time taking processes. You really need to you need to invest a significant amount of money in this direction, right? Patent holders, especially in academia, they do not have the knowledge or expertise to guide themselves through this commercialization process. Whether it is market research, securing funding, navigating regulatory landscapes, right? So many a times I as a researcher would typically be happy in my government secured job or a lifelong job. I don't want to take these kinds of risks. I do not have any kind of support systems to take this kind of a risk, right? Oftentimes, like I mentioned, that there is market incompatibility, right? That yes, the patented invention may be technically innovative, fine, but is there a market demand, right? Can it be commercialized? So we need to start with the end in mind. We need to have the end in mind. What is the end? That we need to solve a real societal problem, a real societal challenge. We need to be able to commercialize whatever we are working upon. And then we start. So if we don't start with the end in mind, we will always be stuck with this problem that yes, you have patented knowledge, but there is no commercialization of that patented knowledge. What are the steps that the government of India has taken to address this commercialization wala problem? right? So you can highlight several initiatives. You can talk about Startup India and Innovation Program, right? So we want to provide funding support to startups. So those of us who are working in these incubation centers in IIMs and IITs and IISCs, right? So they can kind of, with the help of the government and support of the government, take their ideas from, let us say, the laboratory to the market. We definitely have a national intellectual property rights policy in place since 2016. We have definitely strengthened our IP ecosystem, created the necessary awareness, created the institutional capacities to be able to protect and support the commercialization of intellectual property. We are establishing technology transfer offices, right? So our research institutions, bodies such as ISROs and so on and so forth of the world, so they are trying to reduce the gap between academia and industry, right? We do want to enhance agreements, collaborations, and partnerships. And I believe that the next generation of scientists are going to be much more savvy than the previous generation of scientists, in the sense that everybody would want to definitely try and become the next Kiran Majumdar, Shaw, and so on and so forth of the world, right? And of course, there is this Atal Innovation Mission, which is teaching us innovation and tinkering from day zero in schools, right? So that should also help going ahead in this regard. There are certain challenges, right? There are issues of ethics, legal, economic considerations that we need to take into consideration, right? So the moment you start patenting life forms, right, which are relevant for agriculture and medicine, so there is this ethical issue regarding the ownership of genetic resources, right? Because genetic resources ideally are belonging to the entire humanity, right? So the moment you patent genetically modified seeds, right, like the way it was done for BT cotton, so then farmers become dependent on the providers of these seeds, and then these seeds are becoming expensive, and then those farmers are under tremendous financial strain. So there is this huge ethical concern. So India as a country needs to preempt these problems, right? And for which we will have to make sure that our institutions are doing the necessary research on their own and are able to, produce this knowledge for the public good. And there is this great divide between developed and developing countries. So developed countries, they're still dominating patent ownership, right? And therefore there is this inequitable access to patented technologies. Now, if developing countries are A, strive, are starved of this kind of knowledge, or B, they have to reinvent the whole wheel, or C, they have to, live without it. These are all, suboptimal choices, right? So what you need to highlight over here is that India has made significant strides in terms of creating the R&D institutions, creating the scientists, and creating this idea that, we have been patenting very well, right? In a variety of different dimensions. But we need to ensure that we start with the end in mind. The commercialization aspect should not go for a toss, for which we need to have strong industry academia collaborations. We need to have these ecosystems which can help bring about the commercialization of these knowledges. Regulatory support system is there, IP ecosystem is strong enough, right? So for this, we need targeted policy interventions, greater engagement with various stakeholders, as well as an ecosystem approach that needs to be taken, right? And finally, we need to balance the ethical concerns with commercial interests with our national interests, which is where our research institutions need to step up and play a much stronger role. All right. Moving ahead to the next question. This is a fairly current affairs oriented question. There is a lot of discussion around, having, let us say, pay as you use kind of toll collection system. That if I have traveled for 10 kilometers on national highway, I will pay for those 10 kilometers. If I have traveled for 100 kilometers on the national highway, I will pay for those 100 kilometers. So it's not as if that, everybody is paying the same cost, and then I'm taking the bypass and you are not taking the bypass and you are enjoying the entire highway. So it's pay as you go or pay as you use kind of a system. Nevertheless, what is the technology being employed for electronic toll collection on highway? What are the advantages and limitations of this technology? What are the proposed changes that are being suggested time and time again in terms of toll collection in India, right? And would there be potential hazards associated with this transition, right? So in India, for a number of years now, we are having this electronic toll collection that is happening, right? We are automatically collecting toll payments. Cashless kind of system has been implemented, right? So the traffic flow doesn't get disrupted too much because you don't have to wait at the toll booth to give cash and receive back the change and so on. So therefore it reduces the congestion. It promotes fuel efficiency in the sense that you're not stopping so much upon the toll plaza as much as you were doing earlier, right? So in this regard, you have to definitely mention the fast tag system. So this is the most widely used form of electronic toll collection. This is something which is a part of digital India. So digital India is something that you have to highlight. It is a part of the modernization process which is underway in our country, right? So this, what is the technology employed for electronic toll collection? So the technology is the RFID technology, radio frequency identification technology, right? So we are having these small RFID enabled stickers on the windshields in our car, right? So small RFID enabled stickers or fast tags, right? They are affixed on the windshield, right? So what we do is that we pass with this fast tag, right, through an RFID reader. So when I'm crossing the toll plaza, I'm crossing this fast tag, or I'm passing the fast tag through this RFID reader. RFID reader, it deducts the toll amount from my prepaid account, which is linked with this fast tag, right? So now this fast tag has been made mandatory on all national highways, right? And there are 34 million users registered for this service as we speak. Working mechanism, like I explained to you, that the RFID reader, it detects the vehicle's tag. Tag is linked with a prepaid or a bank account, right? And the toll amount is deducted on a real time basis, and a confirmation message in the form of an SMS is sent to the user. There are several advantages: reduction in traffic congestion, right? So you don't need to stop and manually pay and receive. Electronic deduction is happening. So this paying and taking back the change wala process is helping reducing the traffic at toll plazas by 25 to 30%. So there is significant fuel and time savings because the length of the waiting period as well as the crossing period comes down, right? So if you can pass without halting, or you can pass with less halting, so fuel consumption decreases, travel time reduces, right? So Ministry of Road Transport and Highways came up with this number that we have saved 200,000 liters of fuel daily on the national highways. It enhances transparency, right? So cash handling reduces, revenue leakage reduces, pilferage reduces, leakage reduces. So you have a real time data on toll collection, and these numbers, then the numbers are real, right? So your projections which you are using for construction of highways, those projections can be improved based on these data points that you are collecting from the length and breadth of the country. And the environmental benefits are self-explanatory in the form of lower emission from vehicles and therefore cleaner air around these toll plazas at least, right? What are the limitations of the current system? It's not working everywhere. There are technical glitches. So there are these handheld devices that are used on the plazas, because many a times these RFID readers, they are failing to detect the fast tags. So faulty RFID readers, poor signal reception, that causes a variety of delays and even longer wait times, right? You're struggling to with the tech, you're struggling with the damn equipment, right? I could have paid 50 rupees 5 times in the process, in that time in which that tag is now reading my card or my whatever, right? There is regional disparity in adoption. So at least in urban areas, etc., the systems are widely adopted, but in rural highways or in more, isolated locations, the adoption is less. There are security concerns of data breaches, right? Users, they may face privacy risk if this RFID technology is hacked or compromised. And then there may be a dependence on prepaid systems. So you need to maintain a balance in your linked accounts. So vehicles with insufficient balances, they may face issues which may cause traffic delays. Now, what are the proposed changes? That's equally an important part of the question. What are the proposed changes to this electronic toll collection system? So government, while being aware of these challenges, they have said that let us have a GPS based tolling or global positioning system based tolling, right? So this idea of GPS based tolling is that we will be calculating the distance that your vehicle has traveled on the highway, and based upon that we will be deducting an amount from your linked account or your prepaid account, right? So we will be completely getting rid of these physical toll plazas. So nobody needs to pass through the toll plaza. So it will be seamless tolling. So that entire idea of stopping or halting or reducing the speed, etc., while passing through the toll plaza will be completely eliminated, right? And this GPS tolling is something which is not very, very unique in the sense that it has already been successfully implemented in a number of countries, right? We will be integrating FASTag with other payment systems like public transportation, parking, and fuel station, right? So a single card or tag can be used for multiple functions, right? There will be greater interoperability, right? So we'll enhance the interoperability of FASTags with various transportation systems, right? And we'll be upgrading the infrastructure, installing more RFID readers and so on and so forth, right? So one very famous change is this GPS based tolling. Upgrading infrastructure is an alternative, and finding more use of fastags is also on the cards, right? Now, what is the potential hazard in transition to a seamless system, especially the GPS one, right? So there are certain hazards, right? So this GPS based tolling and enhanced tracking mechanism, there will be privacy related issues, right? Because users locations, their travel patterns will be monitored, right? And if this data gets leaked, then whose responsibility is it? There will be even higher technological dependency, and any failure in this technology will cause a significant amount of revenue loss for the government, because the vehicles will anyways pass on the highway then, right? So the idea is that if there is a power outage or a software malfunction or a cyber attack, then that could result into significant revenue loss for the government. There would be an implementation cost, so significant investments in infrastructure and technology will have to come in, and that may not be feasible across the length and breadth of the country. So we afford to have two systems in one country, because universal or national rollout of the system otherwise seems difficult. There will be digital divide, right, in the adoption of advanced tolling technologies, right, in a variety of different areas. So there are mountainous regions, there are forested regions, there are regions where the connectivity may not be so great. So is it an appropriate time for us to move to GPS based tolling? That is something that we need to discuss, right? So broadly, this is the approach that you have to explain the technology behind electronic toll collection. You have to talk about FASTags and what are the benefits that they have entailed. What are the challenges, especially technical challenges, security concerns, and uneven adoption. You have to talk about multiple proposed changes such as GPS based tolling as well as enhanced interoperability, right? And the kind of concerns that they pose in terms of privacy concerns and implementation costs and so on, right? So if you want your ETC system to become truly seamless, then you need to have a technology which can be adopted in a universal manner, in a pan-India manner, right? Which is, cost effective, easily deployable, manageable, glitch free, and something which is available across the length and breadth of the country. So first, all of us need to come to the same level playing field, and then probably we can go towards these even more fancier ideas, right? Because otherwise, if you're having two systems, right, that you are having a fast tag system for one kind of tolling and you are having this GPS based tolling, running two systems for the same problem, I don't know how sensible that appears to be, right? Moving ahead to the next question, right? Industrial pollution of river water, that's a significant environmental issue. Discuss various mitigation measures to deal with this problem, government's initiatives in this regard, right? So industrial pollution of river water is happening because you are discharging untreated water, right, into our rivers. So rapid industrialization, discharge of untreated or partially treated effluent, improper monitoring, that is causing severe pollution and contamination in our river bodies, which is eventually harming human health, agriculture, as well as biodiversity in those ecosystems. Okay. So what are the causes? Like I explained to you that, industrialists or factory owners, they are often looking to cut costs and cut corners in the process, right? So there is a cost associated with treating effluent. You have to neutralize the pH, reduce the temperature, dilute the level of solvents and so on in the final effluent. So it's a costly affair, right? So a lot of people don't have that kind of margins or profitability, or the niyat that is required to treat the effluent. So they will harm the environment by discharging untreated effluent into river bodies, right? So textiles, chemicals, tanneries, paper mills, they are the usual culprits that you have to mention, that they are the ones who are maximum involved in this discharge of untreated or inadequately treated waste into rivers. So you will end up making a river a nalla, right? Like for example, Ganga, Yamuna, अभी पापियों के पाप धोते धोते मतलब खराब हो गई, काइंड ऑफ poor joke that I can crack over here, right? But Ganga is receiving large quantities of industrial waste from tanneries in Kanpur and so on. Heavy metals and chemicals are getting discharged, right? Because extracting these heavy metals and chemicals out of your effluent water, that's a very costly affair, right? So your mercuries and leads and arsenics and cadmiums, they are going into these river bodies. So CPCB, they found that 70% of India's surface water, they are contaminated with toxic industrial pollutants. There is lack of infrastructure for waste treatment in our industrial hubs and zones. So a lot of these small and medium enterprises, they just do not have the financial wherewithal to treat their effluent on their own. They do not have these common effluent treatment plants connections. So they are just, either polluting the surface water or the groundwater, right? What is the impact of industrial pollution? This is fairly easy. So ecosystem gets damaged, oxygen depletion can happen, toxic chemicals ka concentration can go up, exposure can go up, and there can be destruction of natural habitats and biodiversity loss, right? Which has clearly happened in Yamuna River near Delhi, where there is severe oxygen depletion, which has definitely affected fish and other aquatic species. There will be severe health hazards in the form of waterborne diseases, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, because of consumption of these water from these sources. So, for instance, WHO mentions that 38 million Indians, they suffer from waterborne diseases due to ingestion of polluted water. Impact on agriculture will also be negative, in the sense that if farmers are using these contaminated sources of water for cultivation, for irrigation, so yields as well as the food that you're finally growing will be contaminated with toxic metals. And when you pass those products through, let us say, a testing mechanism, then those products will fail, and that will hurt India's image as, let us say, a producer of safe to consume food items. What are the mitigation measures to address this industrial pollution? Easiest thing to do is installation of effluent treatment plants at work, monitoring the implementation of these plants, monitoring the functioning of these plants, making sure that everybody is connected with these plants, right? So setting up these CETPs, that's a very important part of the Namami Gange program, right? CETPs exist as white elephants in a number of parts of our country. That is something which is unacceptable. Adoption of cleaner technologies. So if we can adopt cleaner production technologies which reduces the generation of waste in the first place, that would be supremely helpful, right? So therefore recycling and reusing of water becomes possible when it is of limited quantity, right? Like for example, zero liquid discharge systems, ZLD systems, were enforced by law courts in the textile hub of Tamil Nadu. Of course, that crippled the textile hub of Tamil Nadu for a longish period of time. The insistence by the courts that it implement a ZLD system. So zero liquid discharge for a textile unit is extremely difficult to achieve. It is possible, but it is extremely expensive affair, right? So that is something which we need to gradually move towards. Strict enforcement and penalties need to be applied upon those who are violating these pollution norms, because environment once polluted will take a lot of time to heal. So we have to mention about this Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, because without the proper implementation of this particular law, everything else is just a waste of time, right? Apart from that, we need to have a heavy focus on recycling and reuse of wastewater within the industrial process itself, right? So for example, in Gujarat, Narmada Clean Water Scheme, it encourages industries to reuse treated wastewater. There is a very innovative out-of-the-box solution which I had read a couple of years ago, that if I am an industry located over here, then I should use the water from here and I should discharge my water over here, right? So if I'm discharging my water upstream and I'm picking up my water downstream, I will automatically make sure that I am discharging appropriately treated wastewater, because otherwise I will be using my wastewater in my process and that process will harm my products. So innovative solutions such as this, that forcing industries to pick up water downstream for usage and discharging upstream, will force them to get their acts right. There are other government initiatives that you need to highlight. For example, the Namami Gange program launched in 2014 is something that needs to be highlighted, right? They have created a lot of CETPs in the last 7-8 years. There is this National Mission for Clean Ganga, right? So again, this is related to the above idea. There is National River Conservation Plan, which talks about sewage treatment plants, effluent treatment plants, and public awareness campaign. There is this polluter pays principle which needs to be universally applied in India in a variety of different contexts, right? So this is something that will be helpful. And we have to also talk about the CSR activities in environmental conservation. That a lot of industries, a lot of brands, keeping in mind environmental sustainability, keeping in mind the concept of triple bottom line. So they are supporting river cleaning projects and adopting eco-friendly processes and so on, right? So companies such as Tata Steel and Reliance Industries, they are trying to do their bit, right? So what are the challenges in addressing industrial river pollution? Challenge is weak enforcement, that we may have the laws in existence in India for the last 50 years, but when it comes to the enforcement mechanism, it is as pathetic as it always was. Infrastructure is inadequate. So even while we may have created the plants, are those plants really working? There has to be a sense of public awareness and participation, because until and unless the locals protest, things may not really improve. And there has to be coordination between a variety of agencies, whether it is the government, the executive, the judiciary, media, right, the industrial associations, citizens bodies. There has to be a coordination between a variety of these institutions and bodies. So the broad approach that you have to take is that yes, this is a critical environmental issue which can have a significantly deleterious impact upon ecosystems, health and agriculture. We need to establish effluent treatment plants. We need to encourage adoption of cleaner technologies. But we are stymied by weak enforcement and infrastructural challenges. Government initiatives need to be appreciated and acknowledged. Your Namami Gange, your National River Conservation Plan need to be acknowledged. But if we want success, we need stronger enforcement, public awareness, and collaboration between a variety of stakeholders, right? And then we will be able to achieve what needs to be achieved. So that's the basic idea that you need to highlight over here. Starting with the next question. What role do environmental NGOs and activists play in influencing environmental impact assessment outcomes? Not DIA, EIA, I'm sorry, right? Cite examples with all important details, right? So cite, I'm sure that this is a mistake over here again. Sorry about that, right? So the idea over here is that environmental NGOs and activists, they play a critical role in shaping the EIA outcomes, right? They raise awareness, they mobilize public opinion, they engage in legal battles. So they kind of, help vocalizing the environmental concerns. They make sure that those concerns are a part of the decision making process. So these guys, they are acting as watchdogs, promoting sustainable development, challenging projects that might harm ecosystems, displace communities, or cause irreversible environmental damage. But we also need to play a balancing act over here. Many a times these NGOs may be fronts for inimical forces for India, right? They may just be wanting to delay the implementation of important projects, right? So that's something that we need to be very, very mindful of. So what is the role of environmental NGOs and activists? So public participation and awareness. They facilitate public participation, they disseminate information, they organize public hearings, meetings, and they kind of empower the local communities by informing them, by collecting their opinions and converting it into a collective voice. You have to highlight the role of Kalpavriksha NGO, which has been instrumental in raising awareness about environmental impacts of various infrastructure projects and have been educating local communities about their rights in the entire EIA process. So do check out the website of Kalpavriksha. It will be an eye-opening experience for a lot of you guys, right? Moving ahead, environmental NGOs, they provide expert reviews and submissions, so technical expertise, detailed critiques, highlighting the inaccuracies or omissions. So they are the ones who are the brains behind the entire vocalization of the public opinion, because lay persons like you and me may not have that kind of time, honestly, that may be required to dedicate for this particular activity. So they are the ones who can come up with alternative strategies for mitigating the damage. So Center for Science and Environment, it regularly reviews EIAs and they submit expert recommendations to regulatory authorities. It is very, very important to mention these kinds of names in your answers, that this is very important value addition. They can also legally intervene, like for instance, NGOs and activists, they can challenge the EIA approval for projects, and they can take the matter to the judiciary, like for instance the Narmada Bachao Andolan led by Medha Patkar. So they use legal interventions to challenge the environmental clearances that were given to the Sardar Sarovar Dam project, right? They are the ones who advocate for policy changes, right? So like for example, Greenpeace India can be a name that you can suggest over here, that they are the ones who have helped in the creation of stricter environmental laws, not just in India but across the world, enforcing better implementation of these laws and bringing about greater transparency with the kind of work that they have been doing, right? So examples of NGOs and activists, like I mentioned to you, Narmada Bachao Andolan, Sardar Sarovar project, Medha Patkar, legal battles, public awareness campaigns, lobbying, etc. The outcome being that the dam has eventually been constructed, but it has led to a very strict scrutiny of its environmental impact, right? And it increased compensation for the displaced communities, if not anything else. Save the Western Ghats movement, right? So Western Ghats is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and environmental NGOs, they have been at the forefront of this movement, and they have highlighted the fragile biodiversity of the Western Ghats, and definitely they have helped in bringing about stricter EIA norms in the region and establishment of the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel, that is the Gadgil Committee, to review the developmental activities. Being able to mention that it's a World Heritage Site and that this movement has been there and this committee has been created, these are extremely important value added points. Goa Foundation and Mining Project. As you all may be knowing that Goa is rich in iron ore, but there is significant environmental degradation that is happening because of unregulated mining. So Goa Foundation, it has been a very vocal critique of the social impact of mining. They have petitioned Supreme Court. They have argued that the EIA process was flawed and that it has not been, kept in mind, kept in mind the environmental impact that this mining activity will have on the Goan ecosystem. Right. So Supreme Court imposed a ban on mining in 2012. They demanded strict environmental regulation, citing the failure of EIAs. Again, I would like to highlight that this is a very, very important example to highlight. Okay. Environmental activists and the Vedanta Niyamgiri case. So Vedanta Resources, they wanted to mine bauxite in Odisha's Niyamgiri hills, which were home to Dongaria Kond tribe and were extremely rich in biodiversity. Right. So environmental activists and NGOs like Survival International, they mobilized the local communities and created an international pressure against this project. Right. With the ultimate outcome being that in 2013, Supreme Court ruled that the decision to allow mining would rest with the local Gram Sabhas village councils, and village councils that rejected the proposal. So this project needs to be halted. What are the challenges that are faced by NGOs and activists in influencing EIAs in India? So there is always this allegation of lack of transparency, right? That this entire EIA process lacks transparency, reports are inaccessible to the public, and public hearings are inadequately advertised. So this is entire sham that is being run in the name of EIA. There is a lot of political and corporate pressure to get things passed very, very quickly in the name of development. Right. So a lot of these environmental NGOs, they have faced regulatory restrictions in their functioning because of the pressures that may be. And we finally have weak enforcement of EIA norms. That is also a little bit of a problem in our country, right? So the broad approach that you have to take is highlighted in this conclusion, that environmental NGOs and activists, they are the ones who ensure that EIA process is meaningful and is done implemented with the principles of sustainable development in mind. Public engagement, expert reviews, legal intervention, advocacy are their tools, are their pillars of work, and they have been able to have impact on several major projects, been able to ensure environmental and social concerns are heard, are addressed. We need effectiveness, we need transparency in the EIA process, we need strong legal frameworks, and we need protection from pressure from sources which are having their own profit motives in mind. So as India continues on its developmental trajectory, we need to balance economic growth with environmental protection, in which NGOs and activists are expected to play an important and a positive role. But the ideal framework should be that these concerns should be automatically heard, considered, and acted upon, so that we don't have to fight our battles back and forth, back and forth, back and forth every time. That's very, very important, right? Moving ahead to the last question, that explain how narco-terrorism has emerged as a serious threat across the country and suggest suitable measures to counter narco-terrorism. So narco-terrorism is essentially the combination of drug trafficking and terrorism. So illicit drug trade is used to fund and fuel terrorist activities, that I'm selling these illicit drugs, generating money, which is then being used to, fund terrorist activities across the length and breadth of the country. So this is definitely a serious threat. It affects our national security, social stability, as well as public health, right? So definitely it's a law enforcement issue. It's a geopolitical, socio-economic and security related issue, because a lot of our states, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, Northeast, these are becoming victims of drug trafficking. These areas, their people are suffering because of drug trafficking and are therefore also suffering because of insurgent and extremist activities, right? While answering this question, you have to necessarily speak about the golden crescent, as well as the Golden Triangle. That India is suffering because of proximity to Golden Crescent, that is Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, which are major drug producing regions of the world, as well as the Golden Triangle, that is Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand. So we are stuck between a rock and a hard place in that sense, right? So the heroin trade from Afghanistan, that's a key funding source for various terror groups operating in South Asia. Links to terrorist organizations, right? So there are, a lot of terror outfits, they need money for which they have entered into drug trade. Like for example, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Taliban. So they have been linked to drug smuggling operations, and this narco-terrorism is a complex challenge therefore, right? Drug abuse is rampant in a lot of countries, in a lot of regions in India, which is definitely a public health crisis. It destabilizes the region, it wastes our demographic resource, and it makes our youth susceptible to radicalization because these people, they are, struggling to, think straight when they are under the impact of these kinds of items. Economic impact is negative. A significant amount of black money is generated, right, for this entire activity. Formal economy gets negatively impacted, and of course there is an issue in the sense that law enforcement becomes a problem. So we have strengthened our border security. There is enhanced surveillance and patrolling. There is collaborative patrolling that is happening. BSF as well as NCB are working together for intensifying surveillance along India-Pakistan as well as India-Myanmar border. There is better intelligence sharing that is happening. So United Nations Office on Drug and Control, on Drugs and Crime, so UNODC, that is also playing a facilitative role. We have strengthened the NDPS Act, that is the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. We need to implement it very, very strongly. We have been fast tracking narco terror cases. Asset forfeiture and financial tracking is also being done by Financial Intelligence Unit as well as anti-money laundering agencies in India. Capacity building has also been done for law enforcement agencies. We have specialized narco terror units within our police force, within our armed forces, who have the capabilities to, intervene in these areas and do the necessary steps. We have been upgrading equipment and technology, whether it is drug detection scanners or night vision devices or cyber tools, so that we can dismantle this entire infrastructure. We are also having public awareness and de-addiction campaigns and programs in our country. Red Ribbons Club. So this is an initiative in schools and colleges focusing on educating youth about the dangers of drug addiction, right? So not only do we need to protect our youth, but we also need to protect our country from this entire menace. There is international cooperation that is strengthening diplomatic ties with a lot of countries. So India has signed MOUs with USA's and Myanmar's and Afghanistan's of the world to counter drug trafficking through mutual assistance. We are cooperating with international bodies such as UNODC, Interpol, FATF for technical expertise, resources, and strategies to counter narco-terrorism. So the approach that you have to take over here is that yes, narco-terrorism is a problem. You have to talk about internal security, public health, as well as economic stability of the country. You have to talk about a comprehensive approach that needs to be taken, whether it is border security, legal reforms, capacity building, public awareness, as well as international cooperation. Ultimately, we need to cut the demand sources, we need to cut the supply sources, and we need to completely dismantle this entire infrastructure in our fight against terrorism in our region. We need to secure our borders, and we need to therefore safeguard our youth from the perils of drug addiction. This is my submission to you so far, right? In the next part, we will be discussing the remaining 10 questions. Thank you so much. All the best and Jai Hind to all of you.